All right, so thanks for joining today. The first workshop for this VADA 2022. My name is Dillon. I've been involved with VADA since 2019. I work at the School of Health Information Science. I teach classes there on electronic records and decision support, AI, some patient care delivery models, and organizational behavior and change. I've worked in the industry for a number of years. My background is actually in forestry, so I have some work with GIS way back when, and now I'm in the healthcare IT kind of space and some research and teaching behind that. So that's the prep, and then on today, the main document is up top. I will be showing it. Here it is. It has table of contents. I talk a little bit about, unfortunately, it's a demo, really, it's not really, well, it's a workshop with a demo and presentation. So the beginning of it, I'll get into Power BI, but as soon as possible, but I wanted to talk about the COVID dashboards a little bit, some public data, and then graphing features, and then get into the different sort of graphs that are kind of fundamental to the tool. If they didn't have the graphic features, obviously they, this visualization sort of themes that we're hearing in a lot of the presentations today, yesterday, and the day before, then this tool can't be really utilized. And that was the really main purpose, I think, for Power BI in its competition with Tableau and TIBCO. TIBCO Spotfire is another one. And TIBCO Spotfire also has student accounts. Yeah, so where was I now? So let me go back to Teams for before. So there's a couple data sets, and all these data sets I have acquired them from the BC CDC site, and I'll show that a few times throughout this presentation here. Let me see. Sorry, scroll down a little bit. There it is there. Probably have it. Oh, there it is there as well. Anyways, so the site has, I know you haven't really the time to really look at it while we're kind of going through the exercises, but there's a lot going on here. And, we think about 5 years ago, even this kind of information from BC CDC was very minimalized, stuff like, and also organizations like HiHi, the National, Canadian Health Information Institute in Toronto and Ottawa there, working with the discharge abstracts and stuff like that for hospitalizations. They also had the same sort of thing where there's a CDC where they would aggregate reports and you had to log in and everything. This, you don't have to log in, register your account. It's right there. It's pretty awesome that way. A lot of information related to COVID, hospitalization rates, and even the simple, these are aggregated reports, obviously. If you scroll down a little bit, here's a dashboard, which we'll get to, but there's other reports here that are not aggregated and they're pretty much raw data. For example, the long-term care, there's, even till June 16, 2022 from 2020s, or 2021, sorry. So a couple of years of data right there, and they have specific cases linked to nursing homes, for example, or lodges or long-term care facilities. So that's kind of interesting. And each, a couple of weeks or every week, they have these reports. And I actually created a file for you on that site called Long-Term Care BC, this one here. And then I also have Acute Care BC, which is on this BC CDC site as well. Sorry, bouncing around a little bit, but which is a little bit less than a long-term care for whatever reason. Here's those are the summary reports, but the long-term care, acute care is here, sorry. And then there's some reporting in there as well. These summary reports here, just to go over a little bit with you, are graphs. Unfortunately, they're not actually tables. So those PDFs of the long-term care had tables in them, and I just converted it to Word or Excel, and then I saved them and loaded them into Power BI. But still, there's a lot of interesting information, a lot of effort, a lot of data flowing through this. Just this one website and very linking these COVID cases and different aspects around it. Hospitalizations here with different health authorities, for example, Northern, Vancouver Coastal, Vancouver Island, which we are in Victoria, and then comparing between those health authorities, regions, and BC as a whole. Yeah, but I don't. This is not about kind of reviewing that site in too much detail, but those are the files there. I also have health ideas, which I'll talk about a little bit, which is gives you hospitalization rates. And just a couple months ago, they produced data not in 2022. It's called open, so because it hasn't been sent to the CAI for those discharge abstract databases via the health authorities in the Ministry of Health. So that's interesting. That's something new. The last couple months ago, I only saw 2016 data on there. So I'll talk about that as well. Alrighty. I was just curious if anyone, before I start from the top, from that document, if anyone's worked with Power BI on the call. Anyone work with? No. Let's see now. Okay. Alrighty. So that's a good thing, because I do start from the basics and kind of going forward. Okay, so the BC COVID dashboard, like I mentioned, I have some links there here. Before we go into that, there is this resource for COVID on GIS. It's a GIS background, which the BC CDC dashboard is also on GIS. It does look like some elements of Power BI, which is interesting. And we'll see some differences as we go through our exercise. Manitoba and BC are right here, side by side, which is kind of cool. Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, Manitoba, BC. You can launch them from here as well, and then open the application. I thought that was kind of neat. And another thing I thought was kind of interesting, you might have seen this site before, but the fact that most of them have a backbone or framework around, here's the Manitoba one, around GIS. So there's obviously a lot of work that went into these. Each province is on this site, kind of cool. One thing you can get out of it is how to visualize COVID in certain ways. Histograms and numbers are pretty fundamental. But there's other ways of showing it. There's maps, etc. Here's Newfoundland, New Brunswick. There's a menu item here on the site, and you can scroll through Hamilton, Burnaby, which is in Vancouver, and Alberta, Alberta again, Vancouver, etc. And there's other sites too as well. But this is something I wanted to highlight before I go into this dashboard here. Going back to the document again, I have a link here for the Canadian, sort of the national one, which they do have links in there with COVID. There's all sorts of different data trends. I'm not going to go into detail, but I think when building these kind of dashboards, if I was to teach a class on it, I would kind of look at a variety of different ways of graphing COVID, and then picking which one, or at least having a few different dashboards to show which ones would be better for decision support. That's something that I do teach in one of my classes. Okay, so here's the dashboard here. Oh, sorry. Let's go to that again. All right, so let's look at the dashboard in a little bit of detail before I talk a little bit more about going to Power BI. So the dashboard, again, you can see it's on the ArcGIS or S-Ray or GIS. It does have graphing capabilities on here. Some functionality, you can click on different health regions as well. Vancouver Coastal, for example, and the numbers change. I'll try to imitate that a little bit in the Power BI world. There is tabs as well on this site, and we'll see that it's a little bit tricky to use those tabs in Power BI, but we can mimic them in a certain way. Again, there's tabs down here to change the graphs as well. So graphing is there, and then these in Power BI, these are called cards or sliders or slicers, and I have an exercise on that as well. Okay. Yeah. So, and we'll mimic this dashboard as a screenshot. Okay. So before I go back into the dashboard again with Power BI, there's a couple things. One is the public data that I wanted to cover a little bit with you beforehand. This site here, Health Ideas, is pretty interesting. Like I mentioned, not, within a couple of months, it's changed. Well, it's changed in the sense that there's more data available and data that's fairly recent. Before, it was only 2016, and that was literally a couple of months ago. So if for example, I select the fiscal years here, I can actually select hospitalization data and admissions and stuff that aren't actually submitted to the DAD yet. Not submitted via the health authorities through the Ministry of Health to CAIHI for the discharged abstract database that they then send back to the ministry. And they do that in every province, right? So, but still, this is kind of interesting, something new that I saw and I wanted to touch base on it with you. You can think, acute care, rehab, or other day surgeries. There's all sorts of different admit categories. Electives would be the standard one you could select, and then you would run, you could do a PDF or even Excel file, which is pretty wicked, and then load it to Power BI. It's going to be an aggregate, but still, it's something to think about. Yeah, and then you have the different health authorities, populations over 65 cases, stuff like that. Not COVID, but resource intensive weights, these kind of things. And that's just one part of that reporting tool. There's other utilization rates here. There's also health services, encatchment patterns, operational kind of aspects within the healthcare or patient care delivery in BC. So that's that. Here's just a screenshot of something I just showed earlier, the crude rates for 2021 and 2022 with the open, which means it's not submitted to CAIHI. It's not officially part of CAIHI's DAD database. Another item that I have on this document, and this is, I'm including this because there's two parts. One is that I thought it was really interesting. There's a lot of data with this US Medicare, and I also worked on this US Medicare databases, the PUF files, the public use files, with my work with my project with VADA when I was part of the program in 2019, 2020. There's a couple links I have in here. The reason why I have it, the links kind of separate a bit because there's a lot going on in Medicare. There's a lot of different data sources. There's a lot of systems they bring in with different data. I could spend a couple hours just clicking around and figuring out what data is out there. There's just a lot going on this page, and it's pretty awesome to see that kind of level of access without actually really even registering for these public use files. And so these public use files, this one's on hospital costs, for example, and the ones that I used were 2014, 2020, and it goes to different database. You can download them. You can visualize them in a certain way. So here's the data set here. You can filter it, and on the browser itself. Each data set has probably over 1 million rows to it, and each row is like a provider's claim, and with the facilities, and there's some chronic disease in it, stuff like that. So something that I wanted to share. And I created, this link goes into the same link I just showed you. This was kind of part of my little assignment that I did for VADA with the Tableau. So this is 2017 data, but I created some dashboards to compare California and Florida on Medicare claims. So it was kind of cool. I always wanted to live in both of those states. So I haven't been to Florida yet, but I haven't. anyways. And also the exercise for me was there's a lot of different provider procedure, for example, and so I have to put filters on it and different data points from that public use file. And then one thing I got out of this, and again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but these outliers were interesting because diagnostic radiology in all these public use files from 2012 to 2018 was exponentially greater amount of money going to that than all other procedures almost combined. We're talking, almost $1 billion, which is pretty impressive. I did not know that. And it's Florida and California also have diagnostic radiology, but New York is that much more in that cost level. And there could be other reasons behind it, but that's what I got out of that. And so finding these outliers and showing the graphs is one thing, because I had some conversations with the VADA folks here in the room about, what is Power BI used for? We have visualizations, of course, presented. And Power BI really has that tool of a dashboard. And I think it's almost trying to outcompete Tableau and TIBCO in the industry itself, but also use some of that databases that are available that it can link to and code with R and Python, stuff like that, because it definitely has that flavor to it. But graphing also has this, its benefits, just the graphing itself before running through a stats program. Honestly, when I get a data set, the first thing I like to do is run it through a stats program just to see what happens. That's not a bad thing. But I stumbled across this. I was teaching a class, and one of the students says, "Hey, have you heard about Anscombe's quartet?" I'm like, "What's all that about?" And then he's saying, "Oh, there's these 4 different graphs, and each graph, the stats are almost identical, which is listed here. This is not wiki. The mean values, the variance, the y value." In a regression, correlation is similar. Actually, the regression line is similar as well. But when you graph them, they're all unique. They're all 4 when graphed are unique. And it was from a French fellow in '73, Francis Anscombe. And apparently there's other sort of examples like this. And then the question is, is it just because there's just so few data points? Because obviously there's not a whole lot of data points in this example. And would big data show something similar, or maybe big data would have different kind of trends in the graphing before you go into stats? That's to be determined, I guess. But still, it's a really unique example. I thought I wanted to share it with you before we get into this Power BI. Power BI has different sort of forms of graphing, similar to all other kind of dashboards, even Excel for that matter. But they label it different, label it a certain way. It's called clustered column chart, stacked column chart, clustered bar chart. And those are the 3 main types. There's other sort of graphing as well, of course, but I'll cover those because they're right out of the box. And there's these sliders or slicer sliders and cards that show certain dates or specific data, or you can animate the graph a little bit to show to increase or decrease the amount of data on the graph. And then I'll cover those as well. And then this map of BC, which it does require quite a few steps, which is interesting, and I'll go over those with you. Unfortunately, with the workshop, it's going to be just a demo, but and then I actually have some of this acute and long-term care that I graphed as well. So without further ado, let's go to Power BI. Okay, so in that document, and I'll be kind of toggling through back and forth. Here's the dashboard I created to kind of mimic the BCCDC, which looks like this. The BCCDC one is a pretty, it took them a good team effort to put that together. This is my sort of version. But anyway, so I'll go through each of these, clicking on this one here, and the file on the VADA has this. It's a PBX, this one here, PBIX file. You can just load that into your Power BI and you'll get the same, you'll have the same dashboard as this. And so a couple things before we get into the graph. So these cluster graph, you can see when you go cluster column graph here, custom column chart, sorry. And then you have clustered column as well. Sorry. For these kind of line graphs. And there's a couple steps to do. I'll show you these steps in a bit, but I just want to do an overview of what's on the screen here. This one as well is a clustered. So is this one. And so these cluster columns definitely are mimicking. They look very similar to what we see on the BCCDC. This one here, these graphs, all these graphs look very similar to what I just showed. So that's a good thing. And then we have so then let me go into a couple other graphs here. So this one here is the clustered bar chart. So you have health authorities, and we can actually click on some of the icons here to expand them. So it's a better view. So this is a cluster bar chart. And I'll go over how to set that up. This is another one, which is not a cluster bar chart, it is stacked. Sorry, if you click on it a few times, what happens is that it'll shift some of the graphs around because I have it linked. And I'll show that as well. But so this is the stacked column chart as a graph type. And then next to it is a slightly different version of a stacked bar chart. So column and bar. One's horizontal, one's vertical. Bar is horizontal, columns vertical. And so before I get into circle back to this main one here, which is the start of the graphing, is Power BI itself. The view on the display, there's three main things on the side here that are important. One I just showed, the visualizations, which gives you an array of different ways of charting something. So if I go to page 8 here and I click on this, clustered column chart, it'll show up on the dashboard, and then I start selecting the data. So that's an important, and then there's some formatting and stuff like that behind that one too. And I'll show that in a little bit. Once you select the data, then there's a filters, and these filters show up once the data is placed at XY axes, and I'll show that as well. And then this is a nice, awesome feature of Power BI. Tableau, I wish had this, and same with TIBCO, is fields. Once you select the data, like for this example here, paste this, and then let's say health authority. Once you select the data, then it's highlighted. So you going back to it, like if I go back to the dashboard I created, a few weeks ago, whatever, I'm like, oh, where's this data? And then where's this data coming from? And so you highlight it, and then show that. A glitch going on. Anyways, so then you see where the data is coming from. Whereas in Tableau, if you click on a graph, it's hard to find where that data is coming from. But that's an awesome feature that Power BI has. Some of the other things, there's three items here. One is the actual graph part. The other is the tables. And then the other is the actually relational. So I can link these tables together potentially in a relational database with primary keys. Unfortunately, we don't have primary keys that linked, but I could create that and then have them totally linked together in this whole graphing visualization dashboard process. So there's a few other things here with the data, and I'm not going to go into too much detail. The scripting language for Power BI is called DAX. Let's see here. The way of to actually new column. Oh, okay, yeah, there's a DAX here for the new column, but I need to go into the different format here. Maybe I go back to the oh no, here, sorry, transform data. My apologies. So transform data up top in that ribbon, you can see that just for example, this table is highlighted, and then that table has this kind of script, looks like Excel kind of script with functions. It's called DAX, D-A-X. When you add some more functionality or calculations in this line, or this is on the date column, but it'll have different, for each column, etc. Then you apply some steps. You can reverse those steps, etc. I'm not going through that in today's workshop, but I wanted to show you that process, which is very common on this tool. Oh, another thing I wanted to show the data transform as well. So again, here it's on the top ribbon in the middle. There's a few other functionalities that might be of interest to you. One is Azure Machine Learning. You'll have to create an account, and there's a link to it. So you sign in and you link to this different models, and you can use Power BI to display them. Text analytics, and there's also this AI application called Vision, which I'm not too familiar with, but it's there as well. I've even seen chatbots linked to Power BI. And another thing is if you're into R, there's R scripting here. So you would just click on the R, and then the script shows up. So if I click on R, the script is here. You can plug in the script and then run it to visualize something. You don't really want to do that right now. And same with Python, a similar process. Okay, so graphing. So this custom column chart. Again, we'll go back to this Power BI, and we're page 8 here. Let's delete this one. And you can add pages all along. Each page is a dashboard, whereas from Tableau, from your exercises you were doing in VADA, you have the worksheet, and then you create the dashboard. You link the worksheets to the dashboard, and I think there's even a storyboard in Tableau, which is pretty awesome. You can link all the dashboards together, but unfortunately, Power BI doesn't have a storyboard. But each page could be a dashboard, or each page could be a single graph, so slightly different. So there's this clustered column chart, and then we can add some data. Let's go back to this page 1 and try to reproduce this infamous COVID waves in this graph based on health authorities in BC. And we can see the data is listed here, case, date, and then there's some information on the date on the side. I could maybe minimize these a little bit, make it more visible somehow. So there's case reported, date, and then this is just right out of the BC CDC. So if I go back to this BC CDC thing here, sorry, bounce around again, but underneath the dashboard, there was this dates or sort of data that you needed to download the data. There's three different data sets. That's the regional data and the case data and lab data. I have all of those in that. This is the regional data in that loading of the Power BI, which you can do by get data here. I can click on the workbook or Excel, sorry, or CSV if it was that, or even click more for different data types. But that's been done already. I will, going through this graph, go through an exercise of loading JSON with you, which is a little bit different, but if we have some time during that mapping demo. So then the case reported here, the date, and then the HA. So let's go back to the case reported. cases. There we go. Cases reported, the dates here, and then the HA. But we see it's not the same. So we have this classic clustered, column chart, but it doesn't look like that here. It all looks like lines. And then let's just click on it and then go into the larger format. And you'll see there's dates here, and then these lines. Well, they look like columns. They're small columns. We'll call that. Looks like this could be a line there as well. And that was really what I tried to mimic with this graph. This is solid in here, but it's similar, and so on. But when we click on this, we'll notice that this date hierarchy is different. This took me a little while. So this is the basic step, which I've highlighted in the document, but it took me a little while to figure out how do I make these columns look more like smaller columns, and more like a continuous, range. So again, there's that data. The data selected, and when you select the data, it goes on the X and Y axis. We know that from when we click on the. Oh, sorry. When we yeah. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, sorry. So when we go on the fields, when we selected that data, we'd see the X-axis and Y-axis in legend. So that's if we had something that we didn't want on there, we would remove them just by drag and drop, etc. But when we go back to this diagram, we'll see that there's something not quite the same. This is not all selected here, and we have X-axis as date, we have Y-axis as case reported, and we have legend. So then we go to the page 8, click on the graph again. There we go. Okay, so then we see this dates. Okay, dates there, but there's a whole array of the data in that hierarchy. It's from that file, it's from the format. Case reported, yes, that was there, that's correct, HA. So this is the one that's not quite. And so what I found out is if you click date, it removes the hierarchy, but it still has the date in there, so it's more continuous. And that's where that cluster column chart sort of gets derived. No filters applied. You can apply some filters to this. Yeah, that's the first graph. So that took it's a little bit of trial and error in a way. But it's basic. I mean, in Excel you can graph something similar, but this has a certain functionality with fields, visualizations, and filters. So for me, when I was graphing and doing this dashboard, this is where I'm at the whole time, making sure that the filters are there if they need to be, if there needs to be visualization or formatting, etc. So that's that graph, and then we can go into the next kind of graph that's kind of similar in its setup, which is the case reported by date in HSD. So for the service areas. Let me just do another page. This is again cluster column chart. And then I want to do case reported, and date, but HSD. So again, so we got, let me just see if I can expand this a bit better. Okay, so the first one we did was health authorities. And that's, you're not familiar with BC, but there's Fraser Health is in Surrey, in the Surrey region, for Fraser Valley. And they're the largest health authority by a long shot. They have over 1 million patient encounters per year. Interior Health is in Kelowna, the main city, but there's Kamloops area, Kootenay, stuff like that. Northern's in Prince George, which is up north. Vancouver Coastal, Vancouver, in that area, Sechelt, etc. Vancouver Island here, Victoria, Nanaimo, I mean, actually, Nanaimo and Victoria were separated about 15 years ago. They had different health authorities, actually different systems as well, but they amalgamated. And they also own just above Seashell, there's Powell River. That's also on the health authority for Vancouver Island. So it's not just on the island itself, it's a part of it in the mainland, the remote Bella Coola and stuff like that. Okay, so then these HSD, let's go back here. You'll see that there's East Kootenays, Fraser East, Fraser North, Fraser South. So it's separated into this other little bit broad, more regions than Kootenay boundary, North Shore, North Van or North Vancouver, Northeast, etc., Northern, Northern Interior, Northwest, so on. So it's similar to the health authorities, but and again the same thing. I clicked on date and it graphs it more continuous. And looks similar to the BCCC dashboard, which is here. These cases in public health, and then there's health authorities, etc. Here, back to the report. So, that's from that region. That's from that one file on BCCC that you literally just can click on and download, which is fantastic. And then there's also average as well, which uses the regional one, and we can click through that as well. But it's the same setup as cases reported, date, and HA, and that date is again this part of this filter. We're moving from date hierarchy. And obviously we could, if we want to, graph on the day, it's going to look different. So let's use what we have here and see what happens. Expand it a bit. Change. So you could actually have that listed in there, but if I was to remove this, it'll definitely go back to the line or to the actual clustered column chart. So this sort of tweaking of it. Yeah. So I'm going to go move into that lab graphs as well. One thing is there's some epsilon here. There's some filtering as well. And I'll talk about it a little bit. You can show as a table, you can remove it, you can spotlight it, like, make it sort of the thing we're looking at on the dashboard. Maybe gives you some sort of visualization perspective, so on. I use the back arrow on this quite a bit. Oh, I better change that. Right. There's a bit of a lag time because I do have a little bit of data loaded in this Power BI. Okay, so moving along, we've graphed a few things now with that clustered average cases as well. And we know this tweaking of this report date or date itself in that sort of regional database or sort of regional file. The next is sort of the test, the lab from the CDC, which is these new tests here, turnarounds, and positivity. So if I go back to the dashboard here, there's 3 here. And you can also see that on the DC CDC, we can, I wish there was a way, there's definitely a slider, which I'll show, which is kind of cool on these dashboards. So I don't know, it looks like Power BI was used a little bit here with the GIS, but I'm not too sure. Something they did to add that functionality, but we can do that in Power BI, which is pretty awesome. But these actual tabs in Power BI on the same dashboard is a bit tricky. That's why I have all these graphs graphed here. Maybe the tabs would be linked to the page, because there is an automation. There's an automation here. You can automate certain clicks and buttons. So if you had a button on the graph here that was larger, it would maybe go to page 2 if it's and then so on. I don't have the exercise today, but something to think about. Let's see. Okay, so then this new test, very similar. Again, it highlights the parameters, variables, the X and Y axes in Legend as when you click on the graph, and we can create that graph right away. It's, again, it's that clustered column graph that we're kind of familiar with, and that average testing date, and then maybe we can do region here. Report date. Tests. Oh, okay. So we got date, new tests, and region. Click on this again. Average test rate, and then new test. Okay, there we go. And so then we, again, this simple but effective technique kind of makes it look like what we see on the dashboard. And I do think it looks, there's a trend in this that we see, the orange is Fraser Health, a little bit higher. There's more population in Fraser Health. So these numbers are a little bit higher on the test, which makes sense, etc. And this is the same for these turnaround date and positivity, just different values. Like here's turnaround, here's positivity. I'll graph those right now too as well, but there's positivity up here. We can graph them maybe on the same one here. Minimize this a bit. And then you have can the date positivity turnaround
Yes.
first. Oh, positivity and Sudan. Region. And then we do that same as the before. So that one's kind of even better. You can see we didn't have that selected that date. These trends, I think it would have been a little bit less noticeable, but I think it looks better this way than the other way, than the actual clustered the graphs, little isolated dates where they're continuous. So it's kind of neat. Interesting. Positivity rates. So, and then we have the other graph, which when you're graphing these, sometimes I forget, sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll click on this, but it'll change the graph if you do that. So we just click off of it on the white space and click another one. And that date range again, region, I think turnaround is the one we're needing. Region, and then again that date. So this one's not as well. There is a trend, and I think it makes sense. Let me just expand it a little bit. And before I explain it, it's similar to the graphs is here, but not quite the same. So I don't know why this is the data directly. I didn't change it at all from the site. So maybe just the way it's graphed, it looks a little bit more pronounced. But in the beginning of the COVID or whatever, this COVID pandemic, their turnaround rates was obviously the numbers were higher, which means slower turnaround. And then we get more and more efficient. So like a reverse J-shaped curve or something here. Yeah. Ready? Does anyone have any comments or questions? Anything you'd like to ask about? So there's these Power BI visuals or apps. There's a lot of different apps for Power BI. These are, getting them in the store, then you can run them in your desktop. I don't graphic Gantt one I've used a little bit. Oops. And most of them are free. pretty much all of them are free. And different ways of graphing, KPIs. There's a Sankey chart, which we had that presentation. About the Sankey chart yesterday. I'm trying to remember who the presenter was, but I'll have to think about that. But anyways, the Sankey chart flowing from one side to the other. Oh, maybe it was today. Was it genetics guy? No, it was Gary. Yeah, Gary Van Dunstan. Yeah. Cool, thanks. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different apps you can get and utilize in Power BI. Again, when you mouse over these, you can literally click on one of them and test them out, graph. Maybe this one would work better with, new tests, date, and region. Doesn't look that great. Maybe if I change. Oh, okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe that's what we wanted to see more than the other cluster column. But I started off with cluster column because it's the top part here, which is kind of fundamental, I think, histograms and charts, bar charts. So yeah, literally click on these. Again, if you want graphs, you have one graph here, you can highlight certain parts of it. And we'll get into the filtering in a little bit. But if you want to graph other graphs here, like we want to do this one here, with the same to compare them. I don't have this in my work doc, by the way, but just to test it out right away, it's pretty straightforward. New tests. So maybe that's something we want to utilize instead as a visualization. I'm not too sure the value between this and that. I think this one looks a little bit more interesting because coastal is up top here with new chest. Fraser House is in the orange, which interesting. But maybe this one we actually want to include the hierarchy. Have it graph like that. Okay, so that's the clustered column charts from those three different data sets that the BCCDC has on their website. One thing about the filters we can look at a little bit, and we'll go over that right now, is this age group one. This is one here. Let me graph this out for you. So we have age group, cases, and then reported date. And reported date's similar here with it was selected off the date hierarchy to produce that kind of graph. But let's go do that right now. Who is this one here? Let's check my document. That one there. Stack column chart, yeah. So the stack column. Back. Dashboard. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight this. So the interesting graph, well, this graph, these graphs here and below that we just covered are they're almost very similar, each one of them. Even the vaccine information, I did not, well, sorry, not the vaccine, but all of these, not including the vaccine, are very similar graphing types. The vaccine information is also on the BCCDC, but I did not load it to the Power BI. I separated that. This graph here is, these two graphs here are quite kind of interesting. They also have sliders. There's a couple things going on. They've grouped it in a certain way. And then they have both bar versus column here in the same sort of type. There's also this one as well, which I'll go into afterwards, that is kind of in the same group. So this age group one, age group. Back a little bit. I actually have a slider up top here, which age group, cases, and then report date. Wish we had those licenses. Age group cases, and then report date. Oh, see, that's a good example. So I didn't click on the chart, and so what happens is I created a table automatically by clicking this columns. But if I go back and just highlight it, click it, it'll go to the chart. So again, you can click on any of these once you've graphed it, and it'll convert it to that different graph. That's another thing to kind of think about. Kind of a heat map. In Python, you can do heat maps, etc. But this and report date. So one thing is the filters for this one to make it look similar. I had to manipulate the filters a little bit. So I have, it's a bit stretched, but age group here, cases, and then report date. And then report date is not the hierarchy. So let me just go back and confirm that. Age group, nope, that's in the wrong column. So I have to change that. So that's the, back to that document. Report date is cases and age group. Report date, cases, and age group. So that looks good. But it's not exactly the way I wanted to show it. And then, so there's some filters. You got to check some of the filters. Report age group, cases. Stretch this out. And then go back to the CDC. So we kind of want to look at like this or like that, one of those two. And I was on this level here when I was making the document, or this kind of graph type, sorry. So that stack column. And then the report date. Oh, I see. Maybe the report date needs to be up there. I need to change this. I want cluster. I want this one. Oh, I know what it is. So this is correct, but when we go back to the dashboard, there's a slider that was made, and so when the slider is connecting to this data, it makes it look a little bit more truncated in this actual presentation. Let me see if I can expand this. Sorry, the wrong one. Here we go. Okay. Still looks a little bit different, but there's something going on. Oh, I see. I got the date there in that filter. Gotta figure out how I did that now. So got report date here, got age group, cases, and report date. So I got age group, cases, report date, and I'm missing something in the filter. And I think to do this, I'd have to add the slider really, because then the slider goes in the filter, as I have on top here. So I'll do that now, and then just to make sure that I can do it. But I do have sliders I can go over a little bit later on as well. So these sliders, basically they're a slicer, but there's a certain form of the slicer called a slider. And so there's sliders and cards here. There's card, and then there's also a multi-row card. And they kind of give you a block of information, either a text or date or something, numbers. And you can either have them just static or dynamic. You can click on them to filter the data out. So let me just click on this slider thing. Need to this report date. How do I do this? So I could, let me see here. So I got so I clicked on the report date and it made, so if I didn't click on the report date, it looks like a table. This slicer. Click on the report date, it's a slider. And then I go to, where is it? Oh, manage, no, not manage, interactions. I want to link the slider to the actual graph. Go back down here. Maybe I skipped a few steps here. Let me go back down here to this slider stuff. Okay, maybe I need to select that. Oh, there it is, format. Okay. So I'll go over the sliders again, but there's a format thing. Let me just click on that again. So I'm at the slider. There's between is selected here. There's other selections you can do, but I'm just want to have, if I do like a drop down, it's not, you know, you can select different dates. We don't want that. Just we want it kind of in between on the slider. And then format, and then edit. And then we want to link that to there. So let's see if that works. Oh, shoot. Edit the relationships. Oh, there we go. Okay. Maybe it's just the date range of sliders too long. Okay, so let me expand this out. It's kind of hard to show. So then it should, okay, so then the slider, the dates, when I go closer together, it's looking like what I was trying to do earlier, or at least trying to mimic what this looks like in the grand scheme of things on this dashboard. Mind you, the slider looks a little bit different than this, but there's only June 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th here, whereas mine includes the whole array. So slightly, not exactly the same. Maybe I'll shrink this a little bit, move it down. Okay, over here. Yeah, so let's, and then if I click on this, let's see what it does to the filters. Ah, okay, so then, oh, it looks a little bit different still. Oh, it's working now, but filters is report date, age group, cases, and report date. That seems correct. Let me go back to my dashboard here because I've been working on it for a little longer than a few hours. And then I want to expand this. Oh, that's interesting too. So if you click on one of the graphs, you can actually see all of these icons. If you don't want them linked to the graphs together, you would click on this none, it goes dark. If you want a specific filter on them, each of them have those icons to click on. And so you can either link them all together if you click on a filter, or a part of the graph or a card, or you can have a certain number of them that do that. And I'll show that a little bit more in detail. So, okay, so this one, the slider is basically, I turn it off for all of these. So they're not linked to these graphs, but it is linked to this graph. If I move this slightly, you'll see that it's got a, not, anyways, let me click on the graph again. So report date is in the filter here. I'm not too sure. It's interesting. What happens if I delete it? Doesn't really change much. Oh, it does change. Oh, interesting. Put that back. Let's see here. Maybe I don't think it's anything special. Nope. I'm gonna go back. Report date. Oh, sorry. Clicking on this graph again. Checking the report date is there, but it looks different than the other one. If I move it here again. Oh, I see. Maybe the relative date. Maybe that's what it is. The filters on a relative date. Okay. Minute detail, but still not relevant. Let's see what this one is. That's basic filtering. Oh, interesting. Oh, here we go. Okay. Yeah, it's on relative date. So the extra step for this graph is, you need to check the filters anyways. Usually when you add the X and Y axis and legend, they usually get populated in the filter pages or filter panel, side panel as well. And this one here, for whatever reason, when I put the relative date, graph's slightly different, or so it seems. Anyways, that's the one. That's the slider with the stack bar or stack column. Sorry, stack column chart. Okay. All right, so let's move to the stack bar. The stack bar is age group and gender. Go back to that first page again. First dashboard, I should say. And I could rename these just for now, it's just the default. You can also duplicate the page, copy it, modify it, different variations of it, stuff like that. Okay, so it's this one here. This one has the stack bar chart. Remember, age, class, and gender. The date's not on there. And look at this one as well. It's just similar. The date was here, only a few dates, and it was on the slider. The 11th June, and then this is last updated the 16th, so it's not today's stuff, but close. Anyway, so this age groups and gender. And then we can go to the next page, 13, and then click on stack bar chart. Age group. Let's file the case details, file age group, and date. All right. A little bit laggy. Okay, so this one here, I'm gonna check again. Come on, Shmuel, please. Oh, there we go. Age group cases. Ah, right. Let me just do this one. I have two more graphs, and then I also want to talk about some of the formatting stuff. And obviously, there's there's design features that are in Power for visualizations that not really touching base on that too much, but they are important. Cases, and then right report date we did need. That doesn't look right. Let's see here. So age group cases, gender, age group, gender, maybe I have it say. There it is. Change that. And then maybe move that here. Okay, there we go. And you can manipulate, putting numbers in there and stuff like that within the graph as well. That's just a design feature, and it's kind of in this visual in general. And there's some other properties. You can put a title. You can change the size of it. There's different effects, background features, borders, shadows. That's more on maybe the look and feel of the graph. You can have a zoom in, zoom out, grid lines, data levels. Here's the data levels. You can have those on. So you can have the data levels on the graph. So on. So that's that graph. So more cases in the 20 to 29, and then 30, and then greater than 90. There's less cases. My grandma's 96 this year, so my grandma lives in the Fraser Valley. Yeah, okay. That's age group. So clustered bar chart. This one's pretty basic, but important. I mean, as a health authority, kind of, or health region, health authorities in that region, names with cases reported. Fraser Health being, like I mentioned, the largest health authority here, so it has quite a bit more cases. It's about double the size on patient encounters per year compared to coastal, and maybe even a little bit more than Vancouver Island. Yeah, and so cases reported then just HA, but it's a different sort of click, and I can do that with you right now. The health authorities, cases reported, and we want to do this stacked. Oh no, don't want to use, we want to do the other one. Sorry. Pretty simple, the clustered bar chart. Again, we can change some of the visualizations if we want to. Too bad. We can change just the, what it looks like. Grid lines. See, it's almost like a slider as well. The zoom in, zoom out feature on the graph itself. The sliders you can link to all sorts of different graphs. Bars itself, you can change the color. Yeah, so that's that one. Sorry, this slicers, sliders, and cards. Slicers and sliders is the same kind of functionality in Power BI. And I have a few different ones listed here. Like we showed this one already, but I can kind of zoom in on it again. All of these little icons, once you graph them, they have certain drop-down lists you can select. We want to go between because it's a date range, but we can create a list or drop-down or other sort of features with that slider. So this slicer became a slider. This is also a slicer, and the slicer is this visualization icon called a slicer here. And this one is for the health authorities. So if I just zoom out a little bit, see that all the health authorities, including BC, so the regions, Northern, Vancouver Island, Fraser, unknown, some data is unknown, Interior, Vancouver Coastal. And you do need to link data to this. So in here, I just select the region. So if I unselect the region, they'll just disappear, right? So, right, it just becomes a blank table, basically. Okay, there we go. If we go back to, so that's it. That's in a nutshell. Literally, can you go back to the report? Maybe just go through the steps of just selecting it. Was going to include also, I'll show you some stuff on YouTube. There's a lot of different things you can do with sliders and PowerBI. There's a ton of things.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's more like an animated kind of feature on the dashboard. So, but for this exercise, I just kind of wanted to make sure that we could follow along and setting it up, going from there. So region. I don't want to drop that. I'm not going to figure out what I did. It's too small. Why are you so small? I did something. I kind of jog my memory here. Maybe it's on the document. Oh, that's what I did. Let's see. Oh, I got it. There's an extra step. Okay, let me see here. Okay, clicking on page 1. I think I did something, maybe to the visualization. So I'm clicking on the slider here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then I'm graphing it. And so basically this thing goes, you click on BC, it'll change the numbers and the graphs. It's like a central kind of console almost.
Okay.
So, but yeah, these sliders are kind of cool because you can literally change what's on the dashboard in real time. Depends how you set it up. I have everything pretty much linked to this. You can see there's a few things that aren't, but I can click off of that if I want to actually put it. It should change that to basically put it. There. So I need to make the slider a little bit larger. This right now it's kind of small. Let me try to figure this out. Don't want to drop down because we could have a drop down when we select it, but we don't want that on the list. Oh, this might be it. There we go. So slider settings, go to horizontal, and you have kind of the tiles. And then you can click on each one of these to functional. That's that slider. Okay, so cards are kind of interesting, and we can go back to this BCCDC. These are basically cards here. Oh, you can zoom into these cards on the dashboard. There we go. There's a few of them. Total cases I do have. I mean, the date, there's a certain, you can bring in a date. Hospitalization is interesting because the site, the BCCDC doesn't have hospitalization related to COVID, but this dashboard does. Could be a couple of reasons in the way that the data is processed for hospitalizations. CIHI is obviously heavily involved in that. Maybe it has to go through CIHI first and come back. Do you guys have a question in Manitoba there, or